Doug, welcome back. I know it's been a couple weeks since we last met. You were at the office. We did a deep dive into the network diagram you created. We talked a lot more about scoping. What do you have for us today?
Thanks for having me back. We have gone through, this is the third meeting about the data flow and network diagram. And I think that might be normal for a lot of organizations. We hope to get reviews in between each time. And, sometimes you get a good review in between and sometimes you don't. But this is where we're at. From our initial description of what is out there and who you work with to a draft of what we think is in place to a couple of reviews and some corrections. This is where we've gotten to. So we have the green boxes are out of scope on CUI. The dotted line boxes are in scope and have CUI. And then there is either a legend or a good icon for everything else. VPN servers, firewalls, Wi-Fi, laptops, phones, services, etc.
Okay.
Now, this is the draft of how the organization believes they are networked, how they're connected, how they're secured. And this is not a certification or even an attestation or even an assessment that these things are true. So as we move forward, we will be identifying assets, but also going into those assets and looking at settings and controls and policies and other things to affirm this. But what we get out of this diagram is a nice basis to corral all that discussion.
That looks really good. And this week we do have Cody. He's back. And if you remember Cody, he is our MSP. So he's with MSP Tech Solutions. And then we also have Rodney joining us. He's our VP of sales. So he interfaces a lot with our government clients and contracts. So if you have questions around what type of CUI we may be receiving, he'll be the man to answer those questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. So I guess the question would go out to both of you. Does this look accurate? Do you see any inaccuracies? And then secondly, one of the follow-ups, and this is one of the many kind of double checks, is just how do you get the CUI information and how do you give the CUI information back to your customers?
So Rodney, I'm sure if you...
I accidentally muted myself. So
no problem.
Just trying to, jump back into this because it's been a couple of weeks. So I'm the MSP for MSP Tech Solutions, right?
Right up here.
I'm clear. Okay. And so the SIM, SPD, SBA is my purview as well as the backup server. Clarifying question, that backup server, that's our service to Nova Shield for the CUI data backup, correct?
That's right. My understanding is they don't have direct access to it. That's for you to supply them backups.
Yes. Okay. So then in that case, for us as the MSP, we would have a customer responsibility matrix with Nova Shield to describe how we're fulfilling the CUI requirements around access, personnel security, physical security, and whatnot around that backup server, as well as any and all SIM, SPD, SPA, personnel, devices, and resources. And then, alternatively, we would be looking for our own level 2 certification as an MSP to satisfy that and be able to show that proof of certification around those SIM or those CUI customer assets.
Absolutely. Yeah, we would be looking for that, or just your participation in the assessment and the ability to show that those controls are implemented to the requirement level.
Right. Yeah, we want to talk about that, but I'm, in my consulting business outside of this, when I work with MSPs, I try to tell them don't do that because that's a very convoluted and expensive and crazy process to have to go through for every single one of your CUI customers. So try and find that golden rule, one size fits all, level 2 CUI customer environment that you can pack all those contact customers into. That's either certified or has that CRM ready built with all that evidence and data necessary for anybody's assessment.
I agree. It's a balancing act. There's probably a return on investment after an X number of customers.
Right. Exactly. And the one thing I say to them too is if you want to do it the piecemeal way where you're sitting on everybody's assessment, you're going to have to account for that in your cost and pass that through to the customer, which is probably not going to make you very popular as an MSP with your GovCloud or your government customer. So I try to tell them to stay away from it. It's going to be very expensive.
Feeling overwhelmed by the complex world of CMMC compliance? You're not alone. Small to mid-sized defense contractors are often swamped by the massive list of requirements, unsure of where to begin, lacking resources, and fearing assessment failure. But there's a solution. CMMC Proof, your compliance acceleration system. Unlike typical GRC tools, CMMC Proof breaks down the process into 5 easy-to-follow phases, guiding you through each step of your compliance journey. With everything you need in one place, from CMMC Level 1 and 2 requirements to evidence tracking and more, you'll never feel lost again. Get CMMC compliant faster and easier than ever before. Our system ensures nothing is missed, saving you time and effort. Built by CMMC certified assessors with decades of experience, CMMC Proof delivers real-world expertise and guidance you can trust. By the time your assessment comes, you won't just be ready, you'll be confident. Visit CMMCproof.com to start your 7-day free trial and accelerate your CMMC compliance today.
Yeah, so Darich, as an assessor, I mean, if you were given a network diagram like this, what's missing? Or is this, a really good example of what you would expect and want?
Yeah, I think it's a really good example. It's their role, and it certainly helps having the legend. Understand where are the boundaries. To some things that could be added is potentially identifying specifically the certification boundary versus the assessment boundary. Then that's really the main thing. NIST 171 is not prescriptive to say to what level of detail that network diagram has to be, but for the assessor, you need to be able to clearly identify what's in scope and what's out of scope, which just definitely accomplishes that.
Right.
Having that visual.
And just so I'm clear, so, with the legend, you got the non-CUI environment is the borders in green. Okay, so you have a clear defined internal boundary there between the CUI environment and that admin staff VLAN section, which is out of scope. I think even from an assessment point of view, yeah, I think it's a good diagram to be able to get through controls such as like 313.1 and stuff with border protections around key internal boundaries and external connections and such. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. I like it.
Yeah, I would do a couple of things. Like I would probably move this office kind of in the boundary and the home office is out of the boundary. Well, maybe there's elements of the home that are in the boundary. You need to be able to secure it.
Yep. Rodney, I don't know if you want to chime in. So you're the VP of sales. You're in one interfacing with our defense contracting officers. Any comments about how we're receiving that CUI or FCI from our federal customer?
Yeah, just that this diagram kind of gives a clear indication of what's in our scope and what's out of our scope, what has CUI and what doesn't. So we try to represent who's touching the CUI and who's not and who shouldn't be. So that's kind of the purpose of outlining this, and having that in green is kind of showing what's not in CUI scope.
Yeah. I do have a question really quick, just around the home VLAN piece. We're saying the home router firewall. Is that like an ASA extension of our GCC high firewall or our, Defender around that? Or are we issuing something like a Meraki Z4 that's an owned and managed device for that external connection, for that traffic, for that home office?
Yeah, we really didn't say one or the other. I think it might be useful to talk about what are the minimum controls it needs to have, and could we get by with a variety of different ones?
I just, because it just popped into my mind because we were talking a little bit about that 313.1 and the key internal and external boundaries being defined and monitored and controlled. And then when I saw the home VLAN, I'm like, that unless we are instituting like a Meraki Z4 or something like that to monitor and control that home network and put all those devices inside of it, then we're really trusting the ISP router with a VPN connection, which we would have to then work with each of our home employees to make sure that we get CRMs from those ISPs around that home router and what protections it has in place.
Gotcha. So if this router is owned by the cable company, not so good. Even though we could set up a segment inside of our home, they can always override that because they have access. They have overall access to it.
Which means a threat actor that compromises that ISP now.
So some people might have something that looks like that, where there's a secondary one. They can do whatever they want with this here.
Right.
We need one that we control.
Exactly. And like I said, that's either a Meraki Z4 or we purchase Cisco Firepowers and give them to our home employees and have to spend our time and resources configuring it to whatever cable company router that it's connecting to and coordinate that with them, because they don't usually like to let firewalls that individuals purchase on their network. They want to have that access to the customer environment. So yeah, that's one we need to make sure we either talk about the issue that companies are going to face with homework and remote work, or talk about our mitigation strategy in this scenario.
Great question. Yeah. So would you agree this is the set of requirements, control, segmentation, logging?
Well, for alternative work sites like that, that's more of a physical security control within CMMC around alternative work sites and things that we have to have in place from an administrative or technical control there. But what I'm thinking about is SC, System and Communications Protection 313.1, which has a lot of requirements around monitoring, controlling, and protecting connections to and from external systems and internal boundaries. And given that that home environment is technically an external system, especially because it's rolling through an ISP router, if we don't have management, protection, and control over that connection within that home VLAN, then an assessor could potentially say that all your alternate work sites, they're in scope because they process CUI, but you don't have the adequate or the sufficient controls in place to satisfy 313.1 because you're using all these different ISP routers, especially if you have a multi-state or multi-regional team that's accessing that CUI. You got Comcast somewhere, you got Charter somewhere else. It either expands our CRM liability with those ISPs, or we have to consolidate around one take-home solution or send to the house solution, like a Meraki Z4 or something like that.
Excellent. And I would say from a security standpoint, I totally agree. From a CMMC standpoint, the DoD is not ready to open that can of worms as far as regulating how home networks are set up. They're just kind of grouping them into that alternative work site. But yeah, that definitely from a security standpoint makes a lot of sense. And also each defense contractor organization seeking certification, put whatever criteria or requirements in their alternate work policy, work site policy, that's going to be up to the organization. But
that's going to be on the assessor's interpretation of those practice assessment objectives on whether or not that home network it is included in that external system boundary, considering that the proprietary laptop, if it allows download of CUI, or any kind of local storage on that printer or anything like that in that home boundary, that means that home VLAN becomes an internal VLAN, and any connection from that to the internet becomes an external system boundary because the whole thing becomes in scope. And so then if you don't have those.
I threw up this requirement real quick, Derek, so you can splice it in. Cody's bringing up this requirement, and there are a lot of elements to it. So I just wanted to bring up that graphic.
And within that graphic, I'm just really focusing on that external system boundary definition there. And if you include all that, like we have in the diagram, the printer, the laptop, the hard copy stuff, that's alternative work sites. You're absolutely right. That's 310.5 or whatever. But the printer and the Nova Shield issued laptop, if that allows local storage or CUI is able to be printed from that printer, then that home network is now an internal component of the CUI environment. So that connection from that internal home VLAN through the ISP router to the GCC high environment or to any other in-scope asset becomes an external boundary that is in scope for Nova Shield to protect, control, and monitor. And if we're trusting the ISP to do that, then we have to create CRMs and inherit those controls from them and make sure that those are up to level 2 standards. They basically become an MSP or an SPA at that point, if we trust their route.
But as far as the traffic traversing network devices of the ISP, as long as they are FIPS validated and encrypted, the ISP routers and do not come in scope. I know in the rule it mentions that clarifies around ISPs, because that scope can just go on and on and on. Think about in the context of even outside of someone's home, they're using that Nova Shield laptop there, the coffee shop, or anywhere outside of the internal boundary.
That's an interesting concept, because right here, if your laptop is out at a coffee shop here, we say remote office, right, at a weekend or something like that, you connect up to their printer, that's a different story than if you're just at the coffee shop, you got a VPN on your laptop and you're going out through their stuff and they can't read anything. You send to their printer, different story. And same with the home laptop, like Cody said.
Yeah, so it all comes down to if those Nova Shield issued laptops that are in the home VLAN are allowed to print to a printer that's not Nova Shield owned and controlled, or if they can store CUI locally. Because again, like you said, that the rule did kind of cover it when it came to like VDI. If you're using that Nova Shield laptop to access a VDI through ISP, you're fine because it's all being done and the CUI is being accessed through that virtual environment that the ISP can't see or any of those other network devices can't see. But if you're transmitting CUI from the GCC high environment through a download function onto that Nova Shield laptop, now that ISP router comes in scope. So it really comes down to how that Nova Shield laptop at the home VLAN is processing, transmitting, and storing CUI.
Yeah,
and I definitely agree. From once they're printing that CUI, that's going to put their home network in scope, or as far as their home office, it's going to put their home in scope. And once they have physical CUI, absolutely.
I think we need to be clear about the difference between scope and internal boundary. Because I think the fact that they're accessing CUI from their home office, whether it's through a VDI or not, they're in scope as an alternate work site automatically. But whether or not you expand that scope to as a definition that home environment constitutes an internal boundary or an external boundary between that home environment and the internet or any other external resource, that's the debate that I'm proposing. Is that depending on how that in-scope home VLAN operates determines whether or not it is an external resource that's being accessed by the network, or if it's an internal boundary that's accessing external resources that has to be monitored and controlled.
So just to clarify, so you're saying with this Nova Shield issue laptop, if it's accessing GCC high environment via VDI, you're saying that laptop is still in scope?
No, the laptop is not in scope. If it's accessing it via VDI, but if it's accessing it directly and able to download and store locally,
now we have spillage. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, now we have to include that home VLAN as a part of the internal boundary accessing external resources.
Yeah, that's the way I did draw it. I drew a printer in there, right? So we should be clear that there's some kind of VLAN in here. Those things are connected to, or at least the printer's connected to. Now, speaking practically, a printer is $135. Buy one.
Yeah.
Let's go, right? It's not real hard. And a router that can set up a separate VLAN is about the same price. Get one of those two.
Exactly. And that's why I brought up, because one of the solutions that we've been looking at internally with a couple of customers is a Meraki Z4. It's its own router. It operates on the same infrastructure as your ISP, but it's an internally monitored, and it's almost like an intranet. You hardline into it and it hardlines into your ISP router, and it opens a point-to-point connection with your Meraki dashboard and your internal Meraki network, so that even your printer and your laptop and everything can all hardline into that, and that's your external facing device, and you monitor and control that device from your dashboard. That's one solution that we
I like that. And Cody, you're really hitting home the value of a good network diagram. This will be used over and over again. Anytime you talk about a firewall, a VLAN, a home office certificate, you name it, you're going to be coming back to this thing again and again and making little changes sometimes.
And something just that small pops up too from looking at it and visualizing it and going, oh wait, that doesn't click right with 3.13.1 if these other dominoes fall into place. We need to figure that out.
At this point, Derek, I would move from this task and move on to asset inventory and classification. I think this is good enough. You will always come back and revisit it, but it's good enough to move forward, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we will meet together as a team internally to list all of our assets on the asset inventory and categorize them as either CUI asset, security protection asset, contractor risk managed asset, specialized asset, or out of scope assets. So I
like that flow. That's a good one. I enjoyed that one.
And Doug, is this from your book on the illustrations?
So over here it states this is downloadable for free online. This is just figure 314 from the CMMC handbook. So CMMC handbook.com. It's downloadable for free.
Fantastic. Be sure to tell everyone we know about.
Yeah, you might like this one, Cody. This is the next one. It's like you're an SPA. Now what? Right?
I love that.
They're downloadable for free, and I went and bought the book anyway.
Yeah.
Gotta show the love.
That's right. Hey, it comes in handy.
Oh yeah. The book has a lot more details in there for you.
Yeah, it stays on my desk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is fantastic, Doug. Glad we brought you in to help our company get ready for our level 2 certification. We want to make sure that we don't have a false start once we sign up for our certification, and we want to pass the first time.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to help you out.
Fantastic.
If you receive value from this episode, I invite you to subscribe and like so that you're the first to know when we release new episodes. Also, check out cmmcproof.com to learn more about the arsenal of resources that we provide to equip you to conquer CMMC. We'll see you next time.